A lot of you might be wondering what The Gist is about. The Gist is a talk show program. It is aimed at young women, myself, yourself, who may be going through issues, transitioning from sort of life through stages, but not just transitioning. It's also to do with our health as well, and finances and accommodation and the friends that we keep, societal issues, body images. So things like that really would be relevant to young women. But I would like to say that whilst The Gist is targeted at young women, it is not just for young women, it is also for males as well. So everybody is entitled to learn. It's not just for a certain gender or a certain age. We're completely open to everybody coming. So we invite Deb McKeown, who is the wellbeing coach and also leadership enabler at Flourish Ltd. Let's put our hands together.
What do we mean by well-being? I mean, when I say the word well-being, what does everyone think of a word when you think of well-being? Just call out a word.
Happiness.
Happiness? Yeah.
Satisfaction.
Joy. Sorry.
Joy.
Joy. Yes.
Mental health.
Mental health. Yeah. Peace of mind. Peace of mind. Absolutely. So it's actually quite a diverse concept, and it means different things to each of us. There's so many definitions that you can go out and on that lovely Google. And but the one that I really love is it's around when our physical, psychological, and social needs are met, so that we can flourish. And even in that definition, we might all have different interpretations of that. But really put simply, it's around feeling good and functioning well. And what a great place to be in. But life, unfortunately, we're not always going to have that. There are going to be moments in our lives when our well-being is challenged. There may have already been moments in our lives to date that we reflect and go, actually, my health and well-being wasn't in a great state because of. But it's something that if we can reflect on now and become more proactive with, it enables us to have tools and resources available to us before we need them. So I think hopefully that's answered the question. I'm so passionate about well-being, so I can get a bit carried away. So.
Thank you. I would like to use myself as an example. When I went to university, I did biological sciences. I sort of imagined that I would come out and get a job straight away. That was what my ideal was. But coming out, it wasn't as easy as I thought. It wasn't as straightforward, and I found myself sort of slipping into post-university depression. I didn't even know that was a thing until recently, that people do go into this phase of depression right after university. So in that sense, I wasn't really of awareness that my well-being was something I need to check and be actively aware of. So how do we sort of check ourselves and our well-being? What do we use to measure our well-being, or even just do a self-check of ourselves?
That's a really great question. With well-being, there are elements of well-being, and our physical well-being. If we look at that and we go, that can often be quite objective well-being. So we might be unwell, or we may may have high blood pressure at some stage. We may have a physical change, or it may be that we're employed or we're not employed, or financial well-being. So that's really quite straightforward. So that's what we refer to as objective well-being. But then there's also subjective well-being, which is a lot more interesting, because that's really based around how we experience every day, but also how we feel about our life satisfaction. And that's quite, that can be quite hard to go, how am I tracking on that? One organisation that I worked for, which was an amazing organisation, they were almost ahead, they were so ahead of the game on the well-being, that they actually used branding for their wellbeing program around being +10. And as a leader, I would ask my team, how are you feeling out of 10? How would you rate your well-being out of 10? We were lucky enough that we had it defined, so people understood what well-being meant. But actually, it's such a simple question around how would you rate your well-being now out of 10? And we can all ask ourselves that question now. And some of us might go, actually, I'm feeling a bit of a 5 because I had a bit of a late night last night. Or others might feel, I'm actually feeling quite high up because I've had a great week at work. So a really, really simple check-in, but it might require a little bit of getting a picture of what well-being means to us first, and sort of giving our own, what well-being is, what is our best well-being, and what does in flourish mean for us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I think well-being is something that we don't focus on or even give enough attention as a society in general, and also for young women and men as well. But if we do find ourselves in a place where we found out that our well-being is low, what can we do to what are the steps that we can take to improve our well-being, and not just any step, but active steps that we can put ourselves to.
Okay, I can probably I could spend a week on that. There's so many things we can do, but I think it really comes around to leading ourselves. So being, and what I mean by that is being highly self-aware. So it's when our well-being's not so good, it's going to be harder to find solutions. So almost things that we can put into our pockets before we need it. So there's a beautiful, the 5 ways to well-being, which is a really simple way of looking at it. And the 5 ways are: be active, take notice. So be active, we know what that means. So that's around keeping ourselves physically active. But take notice. Take notice is really, often we're on the tube or we're on our commute, and what are we taking notice of? Often phones. So we could call that taking notice, but actually put the phones down and actually look at what's that weather doing today, or gosh, look at that couple there, what's that person doing? So really taking notice. There's around connect. So connecting with people, actually that social connection is so important. And when well-being was in its infancy, they almost forgot that. They talked about physical and psychological, but they forgot that social piece. That connection is so important. There's keep learning. Learning is so important, and we don't stop learning. I'd love to think, and I loved it that it's young women and I've been invited to talk here. I still haven't learned, and I'm so excited. So keeping learning, it's amazing when you try something new, what it does to you. And the other one is give. And give is not just about the process of giving something to someone. It's watching their response to that gift or that favour that you've done, and the emotion it evokes inside you. So, that's a really simple way of well-being, but I think it's around leading ourselves, being highly self-aware, which, wow. Do we like to look in the mirror? Oh, and sometimes you look in that mirror and you go, oh, it's not a good day. And so you go straight out to the window. But it's not, that self-awareness is not looking necessarily in the mirror, but just being aware of, what we're feeling, what our strengths are, what our resources are, what our, actions are, and how we use those strengths. So that self-awareness is so important, and self-development is really, really important. We don't, from a personal growth perspective, that self-awareness comes before that self-development.
And you mentioned the issue of looking at the mirror. It's so easy to look at somebody else, than it is to look at yourself. And, in that process, we lose our own uniqueness, our own strengths, what makes us unique and different. And we begin to chase after what other people have, that makes them successful. So in the sense of being self-aware, because I think it's something that, we don't give enough attention. And I really want to draw a, clear definition in your own terms of what being self-aware really is and how we can, what are the tools that we can use to check ourselves? Are we actually self-aware or are we not?
Yeah. It's interesting because I can talk about a story. I thought I was really self-aware. And I did this amazing course 3 years ago. And there was an exercise on the course and it's around coaching. And we had to observe a conversation, and it was, we watched the conversation, we took notes, but then we actually had to look at how did we feel about that. And I struggled. I sort of thought, wow, I didn't know how I felt. Post that workshop, I was going for a walk and I just went, wow, I had actually forgotten about my own feelings. I sort of have been looking after, family, career, husband's career, supporting, but I'd actually forgotten about me. So that is just my personal story that, while I sort of am this love wellbeing and self-awareness, it can actually happen quite quickly. Ways that we can, tips for building self-awareness or keeping self-awareness is, mindfulness, practicing mindfulness. I don't know whether anyone in the group's done mindfulness at all. It's an amazing thing to do. And it can be quite simple. There's some amazing apps too that you can do, but what it does is it focuses on the present. So you do some exercises of focusing on the present and what your emotions are. There are things around, there are strengths, tools that you can use online. There's a VIA strengths tool that you can actually do a survey that's free that actually will produce what your top strengths are. So if it's hard for you to reflect on them, there's a survey. You could do your personal SWOT analysis. So do people know what a SWOT analysis is? We'll go to that weakness, so the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. But those strengths, if we come up with ours, but even getting feedback from people you trust and go, actually, what do you see my strengths are? Where do you see my opportunities? Engaging someone that you trust as a check-in and reflection times to say, look, actually, sometimes it's hard for us to check in on our own well-being, but actually having, a really safe, trusted well-being buddy to have a conversation and check in and say, how are you? How are things going? So there are, quite a few things that we can do around self-awareness, but we can lose it too. So I can truly vouch for that too.
Okay, I'm just going to talk a bit about the mindfulness section of things. I've used this app called Headspace. Have you heard about it? Anybody else used it in the audience? Okay, all right. I've used it and I found that the exercises ask you to sort of be in a calm position, sit up straight or look for.
I think even keeping a personal journal, and whether again is that something that's easily done, but capturing what's happened during the day. So I know that that's sort of like after the fact, but it actually will bring awareness for you in terms of what the emotions you've been experiencing during the day have been like. Gives you that information and data to assess and analyse and grow that awareness. It takes time to then put it into practice during the day, because if we don't know what's going on first, and that's why the journal is quite a nice thing to do, because it's something that we can reflect on, but we can also start to extract some patterns or trends to go, actually, there's something that's happening with a particular person. There's some emotions that are going on here, or there's something that's happening when I'm doing a task at work. So using that journal can then, it's into your awareness that actually there's something happening that you can then go, okay, what am I going to do differently? And there might be a huge list to begin with, but just choose one, one that you want to focus on, because there's a lovely 3 A's I used to, and still talk about a lot, and The first A is awareness, and that's a challenge. But often we go to awareness to action straight away. We go, I need to change something. All right, I'm going to start doing this. But there's an A in the middle, and that's acceptance. So we need to actually spend time to go, let's build that awareness if it's through the journal, but actually let's work out what we want. What do we want to change? Do we accept that about ourselves, or I'm not sure about that, or do we need to go and check that further? And then look at the action. What are some things that we can do to change that behaviour?
We have talking to us today, Yinka Adewale. Let's put our hands together for him. Great. So we're going to be talking today about relationships and loneliness.
It's interesting that loneliness itself could manifest in many forms. It's not just when you don't feel connected with people on a physical level, but also you could have this emotional distancing such that you're still around people, but yet you're lonely. So you could be in a space like this where you have everyone, staring at you, and you could even be smiling because it's what we should do socially, right? But then deep inside of you, you don't have any sense of connection. So regardless of the physical realities, the most important thing is to realize that there is a sense of connection. There is a mutual point of connection. And when that is missing, then you're suddenly lonely.
And what are the effects of loneliness? What can it lead to if not addressed?
It's a dangerous thing. Loneliness, let me put it in perspective. Loneliness is as dangerous as smoking 15 sticks of cigarettes in a day. That much damage it does to you. Proven psychologically, proven from psychological studies and also from psychiatric studies. It's a very dangerous thing because it damages, begins to affect your self-worth, your sense of self-worth, begins to affect your sense of value. What kind of value you place on yourself as an individual? It starts to affect your sense of meaning. You begin to suddenly question. There are four big questions we all try to answer in life, and these are the four questions around which many worldviews, even religious worldviews, base their conversations around. Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. Origin, where do I come from? Meaning, why am I here? Morality, what's right and what's wrong? And destiny, where am I going from here? All those four questions, if you go back to this question of loneliness, when you get to the point of meaning, which is where many of us tend to struggle because we have so many millions of books these days written on purpose, and the purpose literature is so huge, and this just kind of blew out in the last 18 years because we've realized that suddenly people are struggling with defining who they are and why they are here. So loneliness is one of the reasons why this happens, because the social structure that should provide support for people to have that sense of discovery when missing does do a lot of good, does damage people's sense of identity.
You mentioned that it's as toxic as smoking 15 cigarettes a day,
Yeah.
which implies that it's accumulative and when stored up can be very bad.
Yeah.
So what sort of relationships should we be, when we talk about loneliness, what sort of relationships are we talking about? Is it just romantic or friends or family? What exactly?
Across board. Many of us here know the old dynamic of how relationships and forming relationships should begin from the family level. Not everyone may have been blessed to have been born into a complete family. In fact, in 1960, in this country, we've had 85% of families being complete. So you had the dad and the mom around the house. In 2015, that figure has dropped down to 65% of families. So the tendency that you will find people who are coming out from broken homes is much higher, even as the rate of people getting married has dropped significantly in our time. So the family institution itself, which is where people should originally tend to find the first anchor for their soul in terms of how they define themselves and how they find understand themselves, is huge. So it's not just that. So that it's a significant as, for instance, school. Now, as you grow older, you discover that you tend to spend more time in certain environments beyond the house. So it's tricky because there's so much time you have, parents have these days to help their children find a sense of identity, because after about 6 or 7, suddenly the children are spending 8 hours at school, 9 hours at school, less time at home. And so you get into the school environment, friends, teachers, bullying, all the social factors now come into play, that affects you. Then you get into the workspace as well, the same thing happens. And then when you get into the romantic relationship, which you mentioned, the same thing happens. So this thing is not just about one level of relationship, it cuts across all levels of relationship. But what I really hope that people in one or two of these relationship dynamics, it can help you mitigate the challenges you could face in other forms of relationship. So for instance, if you're having a very bad romantic relationship, having a family to fall back to can help you weather that storm. But it's going to be really dangerous if you've never had any anchor at each of these different levels of your relationship. Then that's where the trouble begins and people spiral.
So the anchor of connection is kind of like a support system that we can fall back to if we are going through something. Okay, so I wanted to talk about we're supposed to be in an age of technology. We're supposed to be more connected to people. Why? So if we're supposed to be more connected, why are we feeling more lonely?
Okay, this is a very good question. Whenever I have this conversation, I try to kind of draw a parallel or kind of create a dichotomy between superficial connection and deep connection. You and I are wired to have deep connection with people. And what's the essence of depth? The essence of depth is what we call intimacy, where you see into me and I see into you, right? And because you see into me and I see into you, there is this openness that thrives and flourishes, and this sense of vulnerability around each other, without any sense of judgment, but with the warmth of embrace and acceptance, which causes you as a person to flourish. And everything coming through that kind of setup is real, is genuine, is authentic. What happens with social media is that it translates that and presents to us what I call superficial connections with people, such that people who should be your acquaintance are now misconstrued as deep friends. And then what they say to you begins to shape your worldview, and then suddenly you find yourself chasing realities that don't exist. And when you start to do that, because the world, so statistically, we should all have about 20 very deep connections in our lives, statistically. You're not very close to all your family members, trust me. There are some family members, maybe 3, 4, 5 guys, or people in your family, you can say, these people know everything about me, okay? And then you go to your close secondary school friends or high school friends or uni friends, maybe another 5, 6, 7 people, maybe that, depending on who you are. And then you get into work, you find a couple of other guys. Maybe about 20 overall. But then you're on Facebook, and you've got how many friends? 2,500. You're on Instagram, you've got how many friends? 10,000 friends. And the question really is, how many of these 10,000 people do you know? Okay, assuming you're very popular, you know 1,000. But how many of these 1,000 people really know you well? Maybe not that much, so maybe not that many. So that's where the problem comes, Covenant, where social media, even though it's good, even though it does create a pathway to connection, but what people need to understand is that the depth of the connection is not as much as we ascribe value to, and we therefore need to be careful before submitting our entire self to that process.
While social media could, lead to superficial connection, some might consider it a distraction even from actual connection. So in that sense, I think social media brings a lot of issues. I think it has its benefits as well as its issues. But what I want to go back to, which I discussed initially with Deb, was comparisons. We don't know it, but I think it's very subconscious. We tend to compare ourselves to other people, and we ascribe age to it a lot. Oh, yeah. So we give ourselves age-based goals. By 25, I want to be married. By 30, I want to have my own house, my own car. And it's based off of what we've seen on social media. So how do we stay aware of those comparisons that we find ourselves doing subconsciously?
Very good question, Covenant. It's very true. It begins with this. So you go on Instagram, right? You see this real dope-looking chick or guy, and then you're thinking to yourself, I'm not even half as good as this person looks. Perhaps because you've not gone through the phone to see the filters they used. Okay, why do we have filters? Because we want to mask reality. Is that not the reason why we use filters? Why do we use a lot of things to cover the authentic self? It's because we want to present a facade to people that may not necessarily be real. So now, if you marry those together, that's really where the root cause of the challenge really lies. But what I think people need to start to do now is, number one, the metrics that we measure success or fame or popularity by are not real. Take it and hold on to that. The number of likes you get on Facebook or Instagram, all those things are not real. Because let me give you an example. I posted a picture on my Facebook, on my Instagram page, about a career masterclass happening somewhere that was going to have some 6 solid speakers and the top tech guys in that particular country. And there was just about 15 likes on that post. When I post a picture of me pouting, I don't do it. But when I post a picture of myself and somebody, or maybe at a party or raving or dressed up looking all good, then I get like 300 likes or 200 likes. And I'm thinking, that to me is the real measure of where people place emphasis upon. So for you as an individual, use social media as a tool, but begin to say to yourself and begin to just bring yourself to a point where your timing is not the same as another person's timing. Our journeys in life will at best be superficially similar, but will always be fundamentally different. We must understand that. And so comparing yourself with another person could be a dangerous venture when you are not secure in yourself. So say to yourself and begin to understand by yourself, I can be inspired by what someone else is doing. And I always say to people, the moment you see something and you like it, or you're being carried away by something, you should begin to ask yourself, why do I really like that thing? I always tell people there are 3 whys. Ask yourself 3 whys. Why do I like that thing? You give yourself an answer and ask yourself again, why? And then ask a third why, because that will get you to the root cause of the real issue. And the moment you become, and this is now practicing mindfulness, which many of us don't want to do, but we have to do it because Socrates says an unexamined life is not worth living.
Thank you. I want to talk about friends, the friends that we have.
Right.
You've talked very well about comparisons.
Mm-hmm.
If we compare ourselves to our friends, because you said as we advance in age,
Mm-hmm.
we tend to leave our family settings,
Right.
but we transition and we take our influence a lot from the friends that we have around us. So is comparison in that setting always a bad thing?
Not necessarily. See, I believe that iron sharpens iron. I believe that we should hang around people who have a sense of what we think we don't have, but we think we really should be having. And I'm now being very careful because all these things answer to a lot of factors, your sense of maturity. I mean, the fact that you've got Timberland boots, for example, is not what I'm talking about here. So I'm not talking about superficial stuff because we tend to deconstruct issues that really matter into physical, like she's got like Zara clothes and then I need to go and buy Zara clothes and all that nonsense. And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about comparison to actually evaluate value system, and things that really should be contributing to your future and to your journey in life. So I have friends in my space where my comparison with them is not on the level of their sense of achievement, but is on the sense of things like maybe something like, how did you react to that problem? Okay, because I want to become more emotionally intelligent person. I'm not trying to fake it, but I just want to learn, how did you deal with this challenge? How did you overcome this trial? Or what makes you see things this way? How do you navigate through this kind of pathway? Have you been through this before? In that sense, when you begin to compare yourself, you may find that there are interesting learning points to be gained from this whole exercise of comparison. But the problem here, Covenant, I see, is that because we are not even aware of ourselves, comparison does more damage to this generation than good, because we're then trying to become what others are instead of trying to learn from others to become who we are meant to be.
I think that the issue of self-awareness is brought up again.
Yeah.
What about competition? To say you knew who you were and you have a friend who's also maybe not exactly the same as you, but you're going along the same line or the same goal. Is competing with that person a bad thing, or even just people at work as well? Is competition a bad thing in that sense?
Okay, two different things. There is healthy competition and there is unhealthy competition. At work, it's a different ballgame. And that's where, going back to some of the conversations Deb shared earlier, if you notice that you are not the kind of person cut out for that kind of rat race, don't get into a job that puts you in that space. For instance, sales. If you're not going to be, sales is not just about your skill. It also now speaks to the entire person, personality and emotions. If you can't deal with the fact that your colleague is going to close out a transaction of £100,000, which means they walk out at the end of the year with a £60,000 bonus, and you're going to go home with a £20,000 bonus, and you're looking at them, they just got a new Ferrari, and you are there still rolling around in your G-Wagon, which is self-awareness and helps you become a better person, and the kind of competition that leads to you bragging and saying, I beat you, or I outmaneuvered you, or outperformed you. And I always ask people one simple question. Even if you are the first and your friend leaves with the 2-1, even if, so what? So what? He gets a job, you get a job. So what? And I have people who finish with the third, who have done greater things with their lives than friends who made the first. So what? So at the end of the day, don't place your emphasis on things that don't matter or things that don't define your destiny. Focus on things that will help you become a better person and you can scale up from there.
Thank you. Back to the issue of loneliness again. I think you mentioned that loneliness is not necessarily being physically isolated. Yeah. It's more emotional isolation. Yeah. When you take that into the workplace, can that be damaging for our well-being?
It can be. It can be. Again, remember, I mentioned that relationships itself is about having a sense of connectedness with a group of people. So assuming you're working in a team, that you go to meetings with them, everyone sits around the table, you all chat about the goals for the week and chat about your objectives and all of that. But then there is really nobody in the team that you feel a sense of emotional connection with. It's just a matter of time. You're going to come back, and I'm sharing with you an experience of people who are very close to me, who've come to me to say, I've been on this job for 2 years, but I just don't like my team. I don't have anyone in my team that I feel understands me. That's now emotional connection. So they begin. So when you start hearing people make those kind of comments, they don't seem to understand me. I don't think they know what I'm all about. I think they are too judgmental. And if they start to make those kind of comments, that in itself speaks to a sense of emotional isolation. Because if you are emotionally connected to a group of people, going back to the foundations of relationships and the fundamentals of relationships, what you begin to get is that a sense of fulfillment. Even if you weren't up to par on your job, when those kind of people give you feedback, you will likely embrace that more and grow more through that kind of feedback. In fact, psychological studies have proven that feedback that comes with people with whom you are emotionally connected has a greater impact or greater positive effect on you than if it's coming from someone with whom you don't have any kind of emotional connection. So yes, it does have a long-term effect. Short and long-term effect, depending on the person. So everybody has a breaking point, depending on your experiences, education, and exposure. Depending on those three things, we have a breaking point. Some people will break bad pretty early. Some will be resilient, but then will break much later. But the whole thing still is that we will break at some point, and we don't have to wait till we break to find help.
So, one thing that I definitely took from this is emotional connection at work is very important. I think we often dismiss the fact that you need to be connected to those you're working with, not just friends or family, but also who you're working with. So can you tell us a bit about knowing self and how others might know things about us that we don't know, or things that we need to be aware of in that sense.
Okay. There are 4 levels of identity, or 4 types of self that I think everyone needs to know exists with you right now. And if you wanted to do it on a 2x2 matrix of some sort, I can use the model called the Johari window. How many of you have heard of the Johari window? Johari window. Oh, fantastic. Okay. So. Yeah. Okay. Well, not one, but fantastic. So the Johari window was actually was written by a couple of psychologists way back, I think, in the 50s, and it was kind of drawn on the 2x2 matrix. There are dimensions of you that is known to yourself and that is known to others, and there are dimensions that is unknown to even you yourself and that is unknown to others. So if you plot that on the 2x2 matrix, where you have dimensions of yourself that is known to both you and known to others, we call that the open self. It's open because everybody knows about it. Okay, so there's nothing strange. If I say, Covenant is a lovely lady, everybody says, oh, yeah, we know that. Everybody, you're not telling me anything new about Covenant because it's open. We all know she is a lovely young lady, right? But then when you have dimensions that are known to yourself but unknown to others, we call that the hidden self. That's when you put up a facade. No one knows about it. Only you do. They don't. Now, when you have a situation where something is not known to you as a person, but it is known to others, it is the blind self. It's called your blind spot. That those are things that people know about you that you don't even know about yourself. Have you ever had someone talk to you and say, do you know you tend to be very judgmental? You're like, nah, cut that crap. I'm not judgmental. That's your blind self speaking right there, because you don't know what they see. But people see you and they have to tell you what they see. But then because it's gone, you just kind of black that out. So blind spots. Every one of us, we all have blind spots. And relationships are meant to help us around this area. And the 4th, of course, is what we call the unknown self. Things you don't know about yourself and things people don't even know about you. And whenever you get to a safari and a lion breaks loose, then you know that unknown self. Because some of you here will say, I can't even scale a fence until something bigger than you starts to chase after you, and then you can know that you can actually be way better than Greg Rutherford in the long jump. So those 4 dimensions of self exist. Okay, now the dynamic is this. In any particular relationship, for different relationships, they're called windows, right? So assuming it's a quadrant and it's 4 equal squares, there is no relationship in which you have it as 4 equal squares. It's never going to happen. It's never going to be perfect. But what we should do is this, that what we don't know about ourselves, which is now the blind spot, we can ask for feedback. So the more feedback you get, the more you close down on your blind spots and the more you open up your open self. In fact, in any relationship, the most sophisticated and most effective place within which we can have a mutual impact on one another and where we can have the greatest sense of productivity is when we all walk in the open self, in the open arena. The things people know about you and the things people know about you know about yourself and the things people know about you. Because if I know I procrastinate a lot and everybody knows I procrastinate a lot on my team, there is nobody that will ever complain that I procrastinate. All they will then do is send me 10, 15 messages about the same thing every 5 minutes because that's the only way to solve that. And I won't nag at them because I also know I procrastinate, period. Okay? But then, when you get feedback and you close down that gap significantly, the other side of it, which is now, so that's the blind self. Now, to sort out your hidden self, the best way to sort out your hidden self is disclosure. In relationships, there are times you need to make disclosures to people because they may not know that thing about you. So let me give you an example. There was a friend who was having a conversation with me and said, I hate it when people approach me from behind to say hello. I prefer if you come right in front of me. And I was like, why? And she said because she suffered a trauma as a child in which the abuse was done from behind her. And so she hates it. When you walk into a room and you're trying to approach her from the rear, even tapping her from there, she freaks out. She's like, she prefers you. But because it was a team, she disclosed that hidden self and it became open. So everybody knew that, look, this person is scared of this thing. So don't do this to her. So disclosure helps us reduce that bit. Feedback helps us close that gap. But then when you talk about the hidden self or the unknown self, beg your pardon, the unknown self completely, now self-exploration, shared mutual feedback, and everything that has to do with joint collaboration helps you with that. Now the point is this, as I wrap up, to drop the anchor here. At what point or to what extent can people with whom you are not really very sure of your depth of relational, superficial, deep relationship, to what extent can they help you open up more about yourself so that you can be more effective, or so they can be more effective in dealing with you? The answer is this, that it's very difficult in every single relationship, particularly at work, if you don't feel like you are, so people come to you and they tell you stuff about you that is really true, even though you don't see it. I won't accept if it's coming from somebody whom I haven't met before, or someone I've met for the first time, or someone I don't feel any kind of emotional connection. In fact, I'll say, you're judging me. And I will just kind of zone out on that and say, you're judging me, don't talk to me anymore. She hates me. If you watch The Apprentice, you'll see that a lot. People walk on their blind spots. People tell you, you talk too much. And they say, no, I don't talk too much. And so that's just the 4 things. So feedback helps you close your blind spots. Self-disclosure helps you sort out your hidden self. Mutual exploration, self-exploration, self-discovery helps you close out your known self.
Thank you very much. Before we end the session with Yinka, we're going to ask you, open to 3 questions. If you have any question, please feel free to ask Yinka anyway.
Okay, so quite young in my adult life, I used to ask people for feedback on myself. I used to ask them, what do you think of me? Now, I was quite secure in asking that question because I wanted honest feedback.
Right.
But people seem to think it was some sort of insecurity. Now, I don't know whether it was the way I was asking it, but I really want to learn about myself, how people perceive